Well, now here we are again, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I am, as everybody in the world knows, John Atack, and no matter what I do, I cannot escape that fate. And this is my. You're not really a new friend because we met in 2019, first off, but we've only really set about making one another's acquaintance recently. So this is Jeremy Sherman. He has a PhD. Imagine, which he
Say
studied.
I'm a
Woo!
doctor.
And your mentor was Terrence Deacon, um, who is
Yeah,
current
mentor and colleague. Yes,
mentor and now colleague, and you've worked with him for 28 years since
that's
then,
right.
I
Well,
believe.
good
Yeah.
long time.
Um, on his fascinating ideas about emergence and
Yes, you could say
around that.
the how of emergence.
Yeah.
Emergence is one of these words that sounds like transformation, and everybody would like to be able to achieve liftoff from whatever burdens they have. And so emergence has become a pop term. I
Mm.
even had to write a limerick about it.
Do you have that committed to mind or?
I do, in fact.
Oh,
It's about what I call white boxes.
mhm.
So a black box is an unexplained phenomena that in engineering, a white box is a positive one.
Mm.
Here we go. We all need a reason to hope, a leg up on this up-tilted slope. Some terms scientific sound super terrific. Is there hope made specific? Well, nope.
Splendid, great work. Yeah.
So yes, emergence, but I want to make sure that it's clear. We're trying to explain the how, the physical how things happen. So we've jumped right in right here. Obviously, we're talking about cults, and they have been a fascination of mine for a long time.
Mm.
Um, but I work a broad range of topics because with Terry, I've mostly been working on the origins of selves and trying, of organisms and the struggle for existence.
Yeah.
We're talking about the chemical origins, how you'd ever get chemical systems like us that are regenerating ourselves in a chemical universe where everything degenerates.
Mm.
Um, so we're trying to explain the how. You could say that it's origins of life research. And what's peculiar then about my work on cults and what I call psychoproctology, which is the study of absolutism, or you could call assolutism,
And for
is
anybody who's unfamiliar with the subject of proctology, this is the study of the rectal passage of the human being. And it's a profession. You can be a proctologist. I had a friend who used to walk up to people at parties and he'd say, "Hi, I'm an amateur proctologist."
that's right. That's right. So I'm talking about it as the careful scientific study of butt-headed behavior. I mean, this research really started for me when I posed the koan to myself, what is a butthead? Since it can't be just whoever I happen to butt heads with. I was looking for an operational definition
Mm.
of the kind of out of bounds behavior we have to watch out for.
What is the
And
sound of one butthead crapping?
right there we go. If we, and actually, for me, the definition of a cult is really just the plural of asshole.
Mm.
That is, it's a collective of asshole behavior. But again, I don't like the term asshole. I use it because it's the current term of art in folk psychology.
Mm.
What we're really talking about is absolutists,
Mm.
people who, if you think about the original definition of the term absolute, it meant dissolved away from. That is, it is untouchable by anything. Nothing can influence it,
An
like absolute
absolution.
zero.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
right. Like absolution is exactly right. So,
Absolution. Yeah.
so that so that behavior has long fascinated me for a variety of reasons. And then I end up doing this work on the origins of selves struggling for their own existence, and doing it with a guy who had spent 20 years explaining how humans ended up evolving language and how radically different it makes us from other
Mm.
organisms. So I'm a
Absolutely.
kind of a continuity researcher. I study the physical origins of selves trying to do things
mm,
from chemistry, which isn't trying to do anything. I study how language makes us a radically different organism
mm,
from others, radically more visionary, radically more delusional than other critters. How language works, and all the
mm,
way out to what this behavior that only humans are capable of on this planet, which is cultish or absolutist behavior.
mm.
It's a product of language. It's a human thing. And I pay attention to a broad range of cultish kinds of behaviors. I'm interested in the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of assholes. So the diagnosis is how, once again, what is a butthead? Since it can't just be whoever I happen to butt heads with.
Mm,
The treatment, how do you get them to back down?
mm.
How do you keep them from overrunning society, at least?
Well, we haven't kept them from overrunning society. That's the
No,
problem.
no. I mean,
How
no.
might we in the future keep them
How
from doing?
might we?
Yeah,
Because what we're doing isn't working.
mm,
Um,
for
and
sure.
also, how do you prevent asshole behavior through what I think of? I mean, I've had many names for it, but I think of it as off jerking. That is, we all have a appetite that I can ground all the way in the origins of life to imagine ourselves perfectly safe and free, which is basically jerk behavior. That is, so we all have an appetite to be the jerk, and we need to vent that appetite somehow.
Mm.
And so I'm interested in safe ways to do it. So self-adoration is important, self-pleasuring is important, but get a room and don't let it go to your head, is
Yeah.
basically. So that's the asshole prevention side of things, which is to off-jerk it somehow.
Mm.
And
I
there are
mean,
wonderful ways to do it.
yeah, we all need our own private off jerking space, I suppose. Um, I yeah, a couple of things come up, and one of
Please.
them a few weeks ago there was a leader in New Scientist where the editor said that how insignificant we are in the universe. And this word caught me, and I went, well, as far as we know, and it is only as far as we know, but as far as we know, we're the only creature that signifies. We're the only creature we know of that signifies, that actually seeks the significance in things, that makes order of things, we have mathematics, we have music, and we have language. And so therefore, we're incredibly significant. Now, if and when we meet these higher beings from another plane, there might be something else. But at the moment, we only imagine higher beings on another plane and Goldilocks planets where there could be life. So that signifying capacity, which, as you say, there is currently investigation and it's been going on for a long time, but AI is meant to be pushing it along. There's investigation into orca language, whale speak. And we know that there are a variety of phonemes. A dolphin, we have 40 phonemes in the human language. There are 400 in dolphin speak, but we don't know if they're actually signifying very much at all. And certainly the complexity with which we bedeck the world and in which we live. I mean, for me, Kant's observation that there's the world out there, but we live in our signification of the world. We live in our interpretation of the world. That seems to me a useful statement, especially if I'm dealing with somebody in their beliefs, which are often their cultic beliefs, and getting them to think a bit more so that they can adjust their interpretation of the world and therefore inhabit the world in a different way. So let me venture that forth. That's point number one. If you want to say
Yeah,
anything
yeah.
about
So
that, or
I have
simply
I
continue.
have some comments on that.
Mm,
It's funny. Just this weekend, I started to draft a shorter article called "The History of Feeling Small." That is, it's about this topic and
mm,
how it has changed in human culture. Now, I have to make a distinction between significance and meaning
yeah.
making. So I do think that that sunlight or day patterns are significant to trees.
Mm,
Um, that is, they are interpreting, all organisms
mm,
interpret even without feelings or thoughts.
mm,
Uh, uh, but we seem unique in our use of language, which is different from other capacities for significance, which are
Well,
mostly. But
language is signifying. Yeah,
it's
it's using
no, I
signs,
mean,
using
no,
symbols, using.
in so I work in what's called biosemiotics.
Mm,
We're trying to understand how significance happens throughout the entire
mm,
living world.
yeah.
Okay, and so we make a distinction between three kinds of sign relationships. Um, uh, Iconicity is simply a failure to distinguish. So I assume you're the same John I was with a couple of weeks ago. So this is the failure to distinguish. You're iconic of that John, just as
Mm,
I'm. Okay, so that's the ground for all significance is the failure to see a difference.
mm,
Indexical signs are signs that are correlated over time and space. So, for example, if I see the tree blowing, the tree moving, it points to, or like an index to the existence of wind. So, and animals deal with all organisms deal with both of those
mm,
icons and indexes. I mean, when you think about Pavlov's dog, the association the dog makes between the sound and the food, that's an indexical relationship.
mm,
Symbols are a radically different thing. So Terry's book on the subject, after 20 years of researching it, a book that made me cry when I first read it, not because it's at all moving, just that it was terrifyingly detailed about the anatomy and brain changes and all of this. But anyway, uh, we have these culturally held arbitrary signs that we arbitrarily associate
mm,
with content, and we have a whole syntax for putting them together
mm,
that kids at some point realize it's not just a one-to-one correspondence, but it enables us to imagine what isn't immediately present.
yeah.
Icons on indexes are all immediately present, but I can imagine a rhinoceros in a tutu spinning the universe on its horn, and that's not present, it's not even really possible. And I doubt that even with 400 phonemes, a dolphin has the capacity to imagine that.
Mm,
There's lots of pushback. There are people who say, it's arrogant for us to think we're different and from other organisms. There are people who say we're completely different and can transcend our animal nature by simply thinking a different thought.
mm,
I don't buy either of those, but
mm,
I will say that in general, in biology, it's use it or lose it. And since we don't see any sign that other organisms are doing the kind of fabrication we can do, yeah, I think it's a different thing here. And I do assume that it's probably come up many times in the universe before. And I would argue one last thing before I take a breath, which is that I bet that there have been plenty of other symbolic species in the universe, and what has undermined them is cultishness.
mm.
That
Absolutely.
is, no,
Absolutely.
I mean, what I'm saying is that I think we are very likely to be a short-lived experience because of the way that language can make us cultish, and therefore we end up in what I call a dissociation death spiral. Reality gets scary. We detach and dissociate into some kind of fantasy, becoming legends in our own mind, neglecting reality, thereby falling even deeper into these dissociative fantasies until we're doomed. So that's actually what I think is most likely to have happened many times to symbolic species in the universe.
It may well be. Um, it was put to me when I was a teenager by a friend that the what's wrong with this planet is humanity, and that the best thing would be to get rid of humanity. And I was only 17, so I didn't really have, an arsenal of weapons to respond with. And it took me a couple of years to go, well, yeah, if we've messed it up this badly, then we're also the only species that has the tools to resolve this issue. And while pretty much all of my peers, I don't know I can't think of anybody I know who's optimistic about the human future. It seems that we've gone from, and with every reason, but every generation, for as long as we know, throughout recorded history, has had an end days culture within it, whether it be the
Yeah,
Persian culture, and that this in our time, this is climate change that we're now, and it interests me because I can see that we do actually have tools to change this. We and it's something you're working on too. Whether we get to these tools rapidly enough and overcome, the incredible ability to use our intelligence to buttress our stupidity is another matter. But I feel that those tools exist, and I do this podcast solely because of that belief. If I thought that we were grinding to a halt,
yeah.
then I wouldn't do it. What bothers me is that this has become an acceptable thought, just as the Jewish apocalyptic, or the Book of Enoch, or the revelation of St. John the Divine are taken as some sort in every generation of some
Yeah,
absolute doom.
yeah. I think this is useful because it points to a different um, strategy that I'm employing, a
Yeah.
different method.
Mm.
Uh, so I do a lot of prescriptive work and I do some prognostic work. There was nothing about what I was saying that I associate with prescription about what we should do about it, like that humans
Mm.
shouldn't exist or anything like that.
Mm.
Um, uh, I'm I'm doing what I think science is supposed to be doing, which is to get what I want. I set aside what I want to better understand what is.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to do that from the ground up. That is trying to understand what an organism is rather than just assuming we're different, which is what goes on in most of science. So I'm really trying to build us from the ground out and trying to understand what we are.
Mm.
Um, Independent of whether I like it or don't like it or should or prefer a different kind of answer. I've been forced by association to distinguish between positive optimists and negative optimists. I'm
Absolutely.
I'm a negative optimist, and by that I mean to make the world better, I pay attention to what gets in the way of it working better.
Mm.
I'm an optimist, like a oncologist or a criminologist or an earthquake preventer. That is an earthquake detector. That is, all of the practical optimists in the world are actually neg optimists. They are neg optimists, like me. I don't remember. Did I say I was a neg optimist? That's
You
what I meant.
did.
I'm an
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Okay. So what I mean, but in the world of ideas and ideology, you end up with a different kind who are positive optimists, and they drive me crazy.
Mm. Me
Because
too, for a
basically
lifetime.
what they do is they say, let's all on the count of three transcend our nature and become a different kind of being that lives in perfect harmony.
Mm.
It's a kind of, I only
Let's
noticed the
just
other
snap our
day.
fingers and away we
What's that?
go. Let's just snap our fingers and away we go.
That's right. That's right. Because we all, after all, there are decent people, so we all could be one. And I am one for telling you, let's all go and become decent people like me.
Mm.
And if good people like us were in charge of the world, um, and uh, and you're just hammering away on a positive vision. And I think what happens to you is you end up becoming just a virtue signaler. That is,
Mm.
you're one of the good guys. You are sure you're part of the solution, which makes you, from my perspective, part of the problem.
Mm.
So I am decidedly a negative optimist. I work very hard all day, all weekend on trying to make a difference. I feel profoundly impotent to make a difference. And yet at the same time, nothing in me changes my mind about that.
Mm.
I have some good mentors for it. I was very close friends with Dan Ellsberg, the guy who did the Pentagon Papers
Oh,
and
wow.
all of that stuff. And we would talk about this. We neither of us gave a positive prognosis to humankind, but at the same time, it was obvious. What are you going to do? It ain't the end of the world till it's the end of the world.
Mm.
So in the meantime, you're going to do what you can. And yes, as you said, it's humans that have the potential to fix this. But I encourage us to fix it by actually paying attention to the challenges we face, and language is a big one.
Yeah,
Because we could dissociate, because we can make these, because we could just become legends in our own mind.
yeah, and live in the ivory tower we've created. Um,
Yeah,
I mean, there's this kind of optimism. I'm hesitant about the word optimism altogether, because often it means wishful thinking, and that's all it means. People who are, you know, something will turn up, as Mr. McCorber put it in David Copperfield, and
yeah.
that's it. Something will resolve. It'll all be fine. Everything will be great. And it means you don't do the things that are necessary to actually ameliorate, to make the world better. Um, William James said, I will act as if what I did made a difference, which I think is a beautiful statement, that we have the positive intention and we seek to do something good. And we need to be cautious about, you know, how much off jerking is happening and how much we're actually doing something useful. The idea of the optimist, you're possibly unaware of the book Down with School, school spelled Skule. It's a great classic of English literature, but it is very English. I can't remember whether it was Gerald Scarfe or Ronald Searle who
Uh,
illustrated it, but they're alongside the St. Trinian's books, which are much better known. And there's a character in one of them. It's an English private school, where the boys wear little caps and things like that. And one of the characters is called Fotherington Thomas. And I'm sure Spike will find us a picture of him from somewhere. And he gets up in the morning and he says, "Hello, clouds. Hello, sky." And he is despised by Nigel Molesworth, the narrator of the book. And I share that view, that if we are to be positive in our view of the world, we need also to be pragmatic. It's just not having a good feeling. It's actually having some idea of where to go and how to do it. And if I can come back on your term, the asshole, the absolutist, the term of art that I use is authoritarian, which means two things. It means somebody who thinks they're God and we ought to do what they say, and that's an authoritarian leader. And it means people who have decided to put their faith and their trust in such a person, and those are authoritarian followers, and they're absolutists, and they are members of a cult, which, to give
yeah,
it
those
its
are, yeah, yeah.
foundational definition of a cult would be, and the Oxford English Dictionary gives this, the modern definitions I'm not so sure of, is dedication or devotion to a leader or a doctrine.
Yeah, no, I understand. Those are familiar. Let me
Yeah.
try some refinements on them. First
Yeah,
of all, I
surely.
never use the word think or believe about what's going on here, because I actually
Mm.
don't think it's going on at that level.
Okay.
And I also want to say that I think that people should do what I want. That is, I think that we are all engaged in some degree of what I'll call everyday gaslighting. That is, I'd like my frame to dominate your frame, and that's what a give and take tussle is about.
Hmm.
That is people having different perspectives, and they want theirs to prevail. So one of the challenges I'm up against, if I say, what is a butt heads? It can't just be whoever I butt heads with. Then I'm also dealing with a more fundamental question, which is, since we all engage in hypocrisy and a degrees of wanting dominance in conversation, that is, we want our perspective. If we all engage in a degree of self-deception and deceiving other people, if we all engage in some gaslighting, what distinguishes the absolute versions of it? If I lie, and it's evident that I do, I mean, I'm not an exception to humankind, and the evidence is all in, we all lie. What makes a liar? Right? Okay, so um that's where the distinction comes in for me, because everybody, I think, would like to be able to speak with some authority. And so I have to figure, okay, well, then what makes someone an authoritarian? And I don't think it's actually thinking that they deserve it. It's because I agree with myself, and so I engage in a degree of second guessing, which is, do I agree with myself? Am I right? Yes, I checked with myself, and I'm right. Okay, so I want to get. I'm trying to get really specific about this now. In my book on this subject called "What's Up with Assholes: How to Spot and Stop Them Without Becoming One," um, I spent a good 250 pages looking for a better term than asshole, authoritarian, or the psychological terms, which are terrible terms. Narcissist, gaslighter, these are not, they're really blunt instruments. They don't really get at what's going on. And where I land is it's a kind of robotic behavior. So where you are playing hero by playing wild card trump cards. So basically, a trump card would be any positive, absolutely positive sounding term. So if it's good sounding, if it's positive, it's about me. If it's bad sounding, it's about my enemies or rivals. So you see this classically in what Trump's doing. That is, they're paying no attention to what the words mean. It's just that if it sounds good, it's about them. If it sounds bad, it's about their rivals.
But philologists use the term per word and snarl word.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. It's all being done by flavor. If it's sweet, it's about me. If it's sour, it's about my enemies. It's not, and it takes no thinking. In fact, thinking gets in the way of it. You would lose your conscience if you're doing it, and you would simply say, it's a robotic behavior. So you're robotically playing hero against villains. And the term I didn't have hero bot, it's so obvious, but I called them Trump bots, but it was lowercase t, because Trump means two things. Its original means fake, and it means beats all.
In German, of course, it means fart as well.
That's right. Okay, so the fart connection might also tie into the fake, which is it's a brain fart in effect.
Yeah.
So so all of that goes into my sense of what's going on with them, and what a relief it would be for any living being, because you feel perfectly safe and perfectly free. That is, you get a wild card. You can do whatever you want if you're a cult leader, and whatever you do is above. It's separated apart. Nothing can influence it.
Yep.
And that's a place that all humans could crave. That's where our demand for it would be. So it's not just brainwashing, it's brain purging. I want to be free from doubt.
And which is, of course, where the term brainwashing came from. It's a Confucian term for the cleansing of the mind, which to Confucians, of course, is in the heart, not in the head. And it was originally, Sinao came from that idea.
And there is some real true brainwashing in the world. Chinese brainwashing is brainwashing. That is, if they send you to a re-education camp, that's brainwashing. But the appetite has to be recognized. Humans would like to be perfectly safe and free. So when someone dangles that opportunity, they will be tempted by it. We all will be tempted by it.
Yeah. I mean, I would question one idea that you've put, which is that we all want to dominate with our ideas, in our conversation. I think that we can appreciate cognitive dissonance. I think we can really enjoy somebody else bringing an idea in which challenges our ideas. So I think it can be slightly more complicated. If we look at narcissism, and I couldn't agree more, it's a ludicrous term. Havelock Ellis was the first to use it. And by it, he meant somebody who does not want to have sex with anyone but themselves, which is an accurate use of the term. Freud then came along and mistakenly said it's somebody who only loves themselves. Then Erich Fromm, the great Freudian, came along and said, well, Freud was wrong about that. It means somebody who doesn't know how to love.
I've heard that one recently from an 84-year-old psychotherapist, a friend of mine. Yes, it's all of that's not getting it. And what's ironic about it is it's named after a guy who couldn't stop looking at himself, when the hardest thing to get a narcissist to do is look at themselves. They're looking at an idealization of themselves.
Yeah. It's the
robotic hero book. That's right. But I want to come back to what you just said about how we can enjoy cognitive dissonance. You're talking to a guy who, I consider myself an intellectual I'm devoutly intellectually bi-curious, meaning that when I hear two things coming out of my mouth or someone else's that are contradictions, I find it fascinating, but not because I'm a virtuous person, but because it's my pay dirt. It's where every article I've written has been based on some paradox or inconsistency. And yet I don't want to go as far as you went, which is, I want to point to the way in which it's related to pos-optimism. So you said we can. Yes, it is possible. Some people. Um, and yes, it's more complicated. We can enjoy that, and we might hope that people enjoy that. I'm arguing that in general, the tendency is the other direction. That
Oh,
is, there's actually a fundamental aversion to paradox. We don't like irresolved or we humans have got to eliminate doubt as fast as we can. We live in a clusterflux of a world. And so we're trying to turn doubts into habits as fast as we can. We are jonesing for habits. That's what the brain does, is it turns stuff into assumption as fast as it possibly can, and we still can't keep up. So I have to just flag that. And one form it takes, so just to tie it back in, we were talking earlier about optimism, pessimism. I think optimism and pessimism are subjective because, after all, I mean, if you think the likelihood of something is better than I do, then you're more optimistic than I am. But it's relative. On top of that, it is hope, and hope is, I think. So we say we need to be hopeful and we need to be pragmatic. But for me, the really interesting question is when there's tension between the two. As we make a virtue out of hope and we make a virtue out of realism, and they're at odds with each other often. They are often at odds. So for example, one way to think about this is in a partnership, honesty is a virtue, so is kindness. Kindness is the hopeful encouragement we give each other. Okay, well, I
sometimes
think
it's kind to be dishonest.
that's right. There are trade-offs, and we don't like to think about the trade-offs. So, and instead we end up getting in these hypocritical states where we're pissed at someone for being too honest with us or too kind, and why are you humoring me? So I think that we need to get better at looking at the fundamental tensions. We need a reason we need to be hopeful. We need to be realistic, and they don't sit well with each other often. It's an and/or situation. Sometimes you can be hopeful and realistic. Sometimes you've got to choose.
Yes, absolutely. I love the expression clusterflux, by the way. That's
Oh,
really
good.
that's really great. Yeah, I mean, I was interviewed for a great documentary called "The Nature of Existence" a long time ago,
Yeah.
and what the guy had done was he traveled around. Lovely guy. He edits Curb Your Enthusiasm for a living.
Oh,
But he's a really smart, funny guy, really unique guy. And he just decided on this project. He'd done Trekkies about the Star Trek people, and they invited him back to Trekkies too because they hadn't understood the first one. But he went, "What is the nature of existence? I know I'm going to find 200 people. I'm going to find rabbis and priests and Taoist sages and Hindu gurus, but also psychologists, physicists." He interviewed Richard Dawkins the day after he interviewed me. We all make mistakes. But he'd say he got a set of questions. It took more than 2 hours to ask these questions that he asked everybody. And I was really gratified because afterwards he said, we're pretty near the 200 by this time. He said, everybody else I've talked to, within 5 minutes, I knew what their answers would be to all of the other questions. And I'd given him some perplexity because I had not followed the standard atheist model or the standard theist model or that sort of thing. One of the questions he asked me, and which really resonated, and I'd not really given voice to the thought before, he said, "Do you believe we have free will?" And I said, "No, but I think we can get it." And I hadn't, until the thought externalized itself, I hadn't thought about it. And coming to say something like Phil Zimbardo and his work on situationism, and in the Lucifer Effect, he comes to this point where 500 pages, this interesting, if somewhat over detailed book, he comes to the conclusion, he says, "I have proved that evil is situational. It doesn't come from evil people. It's something that's created. And I would therefore hazard to guess that goodness is situational also." And one of the stories, he was Chip Frederick's expert witness. Frederick was given 8 years for torturing people in Abu Ghraib. And he said, well, Don Rumsfeld's actually the person who should be going to jail for this. And I definitely agree that Don Rumsfeld should have been sent to jail. But he went from there to prove his point. He talked about Joe Darby. Now, Joe Darby, of course, revealed the Abu Ghraib photographs. And when he was first given the CD, because he just asked for some photos of Iraq to take home, and he looked at the CD and he threw it in the bin. And then he took it out. And he said, my life will be at risk for having done this. And indeed, Don Rumsfeld outed him. He named him publicly. So I believe from that time to this, he's had four people guarding him from his fellow Marines. Semper Fi and all of that. And it seemed to me that he'd given an argument, in fact, by looking at Joe Darby, that said, maybe not everything is situational. Maybe we are able to develop will. You know, whether it's free or not, it's another matter. One imagines it would have to be will. But this thought, which I think is somewhat essential as to whether we are driven, you know, from the first karmic moment of the Big Bang and nothing, it's all deterministic, or whether we have agency. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so that debate goes round and round, as do the questions of existence, because people don't deal with the how question. That we start with assumptions about things. Let's take, for example, that we have will, or that we don't have will. And we don't actually explain what will is and how it emerges as a different kind of existence. So there are things that exist in the universe that are non-living, and they exist by durability, by relative durability. A rock persists, and what we could say about it, what the definition of existence would be, that it can change what physically happens in the world. A rock can change what physically happens, but it doesn't have will because it's just existing by durability and will last, and is completely passive to its circumstances. Okay. Since we haven't got an explanation yet, that's what Terry and I work on, and we posit a way to think about it. We actually explain the will to live from chemistry, how it could ever emerge. We have a physical chemical model for how chemistry could start trying to maintain its own organization, and then how that could evolve all the way up to living beings. But in the meantime, the debate about free will is done in the abstract, as are questions about existence. They're done in the abstract, where we're just using abstract concepts and putting them together into kind of reverse engineering models of how we would make the world. And then we're also dealing with them by asking loaded questions on top of it, like Abu Ghraib. Okay, that's not how I'm interested in it. I'm interested in what we've actually got. I know that we have will. That is, I have the will to live. I have struggle for my existence, and I have an origins of that, how that could ever come, within nothing but chemistry, because that's all I am. I'm not something added to chemistry. I'm actually a reduction of chemical possibilities that keeps itself in that reduced state. I am a looped constraint process that prevents myself from ending. And when I die, I'll be back to just chemistry, free to do lots more. So what the free will debate completely ignores is, what the fuck is will? And how does it emerge from non-will? And you get two versions of it. One of them is that we're impotent, and the other is that we're omnipotent. And we're neither. We're somnipotent. All organisms are somnipotent. We have some power. We're also somniscient. That is, we have some knowledge of our environment. We are in constant interaction with our environment because we are at the mercy of it. We are not free or independent from it. But these are conclusions I draw not out of thin air, but from an explanation for what will actually is and how it could emerge. And therefore, I think it's a different approach to the question that sidesteps are we impotent or are we omnipotent? Which is what the free will question comes down to. It's a false dichotomy. Obviously, I can change some things and not others. I'm there's no escaping my external influences,
Mm,
but they're not cause and effect. I'm not bounced around like a billiard ball
mm,
so much as I am interpreting. Organisms interpret their environment, and interpretation is different from cause and effect.
mm,
A stop sign doesn't cause me to stop unless I crash into it.
mm.
Rather, I stop at it because I'm interpreting it as about my will to live, that it's about traffic with respect to my will to live. It's a very different process, and that's completely glossed. That is, most scientists don't even make that distinction. Anyway, that's a mouthful. I
Yeah, of
apparently
course.
get
Yeah.
animated about it.
I,
That's an
I, w- I
example
wouldn't
of
be
me.
I wouldn't be talking to you if I didn't want you to give
Okay.
mouthfuls of information. That's
Yeah, so
absolutely fine.
there's some yeah, that's check that out. That's me doing the everyday version of gaslighting. I'm emphatic about a perspective, and I'm hoping that it persuades. That's a human thing.
Hmm.
The question then is, am I a gaslighter for wanting to do it? I have many people who say I am. That is because I'm trying to convince them of something, I must be a gaslighter or
Mm,
an asshole or something like that. And
mm.
I'm saying, no, it's a really good question. At what point does someone's emphaticness become make them a gaslighter? At what point does someone's claims of authority make them authoritarians? Those are good questions.
They are good questions, and I think we ought to pay attention to them. That, as you say, the urge to dominate in conversation, the desire to make one's point and get it over. There seem to be different levels of conversation. I mean, as a teenager, I was incredibly fortunate. I had a brother who was 7 years older than me. And so he got me to read things that I really shouldn't have been reading at the age of 14 or 15. And among them was Plato's Symposium, which
Yeah,
had a permanent effect on me. And I am not a Platonist. Don't get me wrong. I
good,
don't believe
good.
we should put baby girls on the hillside and kill poets. Well, some of them maybe, but that sort of thought that you could have these brilliant minds, these people sitting down and having a conversation, and the conversation need not be um, simply, a battering of the other person to get them to agree. That a conversation can become an exploration between people where dominance falls away, and the idea is, what are the ideas and how do we make sense of them? And there you have a discussion as opposed to what is technically called an apology. That's a dangerous word, an argument. So I think we do go into the world as apologists. Of course, I've spent 40 years talking to a lot of it to talking with people who've been involved in Scientology and showing them that there are inconsistencies in the ideas of Scientology. Now, it's very tempting to show them they're wrong, but that's not a game that you're going to win at when you seek to dominate the person into taking a view. So you have to have a certain authority in the conversation. They have to believe that you know what you're talking about, which I can usually demonstrate with Scientology with some ease, because I know far too much about it. But what's happening is engaging their mind so that they will feel able to think about it. And my view of authoritarianism is people have kind of, I'm not clever enough. I'm not wise enough. Oh, this person is expressing certainty. Looking at, and we've actually managed an hour without mentioning the Nazis, so that's pretty good. Not meant to be able to do that on YouTube. I think you're only meant to be able to last 4 minutes. But the certainty that Hitler put forward meant that 45% of medical doctors in Germany and Austria joined the Nazi Party. I think currently 4% of the population are members of the Chinese Communist Party. 45% of these highly trained people with these degrees, that they were willing to give up their own authority. They were willing to say, oh, this man is right. He has the right view of the world. Let's go and lock up some gypsies and some Jews because he says it's a good idea. So having conversations that are discussions, having conversations where I'm not trying to put my point over, I'm exploring something in the company of another person or other people, seems to be another possibility here.
I, I live and breathe in that world. That's
Oh,
what that's my I'm steeped in it, and
mm,
actually I watch out for two kinds of company that uh, one is people who aren't drawn to that and would rather have small talk, and the other is those who assume that you could say a kind of sensitivity where they are quick to assume that you are only trying to win, that you have no substantive point, but
Yeah.
you're just trying to be an expert. I'm not good company for people like that because I'm actually I take the lesson from Plato and Aristotle is to listen really well
Mm.
and to feel perfectly free to refute.
Mm.
That is that they are that's what goes on in philosophy, and I've worked enough among the academics there that we do that. That is,
Mm.
we are willing to we don't have to walk on eggshells around each other because we're not actually, I mean, we have minimized. I would say that philosophy, as the love of wisdom, which
Mm.
any fool can claim, what it really is overcoming your ego identity with an idea enough that you are willing to pay more attention to reality.
Yeah.
What Bertrand Russell calls a peculiarly stubborn attempt to think clearly. What's stubborn about it is that you're at least sitting on your egotistical commitment to things. But what I want to say also is that I am exploring a realm of intervention that I think is necessary and is different from what you just described.
Mm.
Okay. And the best case where I saw the contrast most was for the last 8 years, I took a walk once a week with Joan Blades, who is the founder of the big United States progressive organization Move On, and had moved on from that, having retired from it, to a program that brought together right-wing and left-wing
Mm.
people, a bridging program. And these are
Mm.
big community things. Well, we are no longer taking those walks because she says that if you demonstrate, if you come across abrasively with these people and show them that they're wrong, a right wing or a Trump
Mm.
supporter, they will block and back you off. They will not engage with you. That is the only alternative is to try to build rapport through engagement where you concede and you show receptivity and you connect with them
Mm.
and they will reciprocate. And I'm saying, no, that's true of some people,
Mm.
but it's not true of all people.
Mm.
And there are, when you're talking about, I mean, I do not think Scientology is nearly as grounding and hard to break away from as, for example, Trumpism, which is clearly an outright cult at this point. But the only thing you can do with these people, it's a different kind of intervention, is disappoint them. They are out there playing hero. And I am trying, this last weekend, all I did was write, I have some techniques for actually shaming them. And yes, I know they'll back off. The point about an absolutist is nothing works with them because the only thing they're doing is making sure that nothing works with them. That's what absolutism has to protect its own
Mm.
absoluteness. And so you have to just keep on exposing that that's all they're doing.
Mm.
What I say is don't debate them. They're just masturbating to you taking the bait. Expose that that's what they're doing. And Joan and most positive optimists have no room for this
Mm.
because they are holding out for a kind of conversation that you and I can engage in, or you can engage in when you brought someone into an intervention on a cult experience, but is not what's going to necessarily save us when the world gets overrun by 45% of all doctors siding with not with the Nazis, not necessarily because they believe it, but because it's the only way they can keep their lives alive. I mean, the quantity of people who simply fall in line because the alternative, we're about to see this in the United States if Trump wins. The amount of people who will fall in line because it's simply safer.
Well,
And
look at the
I
way the Republican Party fell in line with him at the
totally,
original
totally,
nomination. So
that's
many
right.
Republicans, you'd only had Mitt Romney and John McCain, not
That's
two
right.
of my
And
heroes.
they right.
And then,
And they're
before
ostracized.
the nomination, they were all, oh no, we'll never have him. And then the day came, and
No, that's right. And that's because they see it in the pyramid scheme, they see an advantage.
hmm,
But at some point, it's not about that. It's about avoiding the disadvantage of being ostracized, exiled, killed.
hmm,
I mean, the way it's looking with Project 2025 is that they really, really want full scale fascism. It's no longer hand wringing or an exaggeration to say so. They're very specific about it.
hmm.
Um, so anyway,
And I
they,
agree with you that sometimes, and I've had 40 years of talking to people about what they believe. And um, I don't know how many people have left Scientology because of me, but it's in the thousands. Um,
congratulations on that.
well, thank you. And I've spoken directly, I know, with about 600 people and assisted them, sometimes for 10 minutes and sometimes one guy for 35 years in rethinking their relationship with this group and its teachings. And so I would generally go for rapport building. I would generally go for actually showing contradictions in the leader's teaching as opposed to what anybody says about them,
Yeah.
what any of the external evidence is, because that evokes the cognitive dissonance in the person where they have to make a decision about, which is the right way to deal with this. But I agree with you that sometimes it's a matter of challenge, that sometimes you can point out to somebody that what they're doing is destructive and it's destructive to them. Rather than the kind of megaphoning, which is what we tend to see, these awful videos of people who are supposedly left or supposedly right. I'm not really sure about wings personally. I think you need both of them if you're going to fly. But these people will stand a yard away from each other and yell their FUs at one another without really getting anywhere. But I mean, I've certainly not had the same sort of elaborate problem with Trump followers that I have with Scientologists. And I know in the intervention world, Scientologists are definitely thought of as being the hardest nuts to crack. I've not, in the last 35 years, I've not spoken with any Scientologist who kept their beliefs after talking to me. Not because my intention is to take their beliefs away or to change their beliefs. It is to empower them to think more for themselves and be less under the yoke of the
Yeah,
leader.
I'm actually yeah, so I'm actually trying to change beliefs, and I don't mind admitting it. And I also think that it it's it's almost impossible with a absolutist because of basically what the question is, how do you humbly humble someone who will say or do anything to avoid human humility? That is the fundamental question. I think it's very difficult. Um, but I also think that of the variety of things where we claim, well, this strategy won't work, it's important to remember that they are designed for no strategy to work. And actually, so I don't actually try to persuade. I won't debate a Trumpist. I engage with them. You could say they're my counterpart to your Scientology thing.
Mm,
Um,
sure.
and I don't hold out hopes of changing their mind by debating them or talking about contradictions in their behavior. In fact, I think it's better to expose what they're doing, that they are robotically, it's a consequence. Their inconsistencies are a consequence of if you simply take every positive term and you use it about yourself, you are going to ignore the contradictions. Am I hopeful? Yes. Am I realistic? Yes. I mean, a Trumpist comes right out of the box with me and says, I'm a critical thinker. He has no idea what the word means, what the concept means. All he knows is it's hella good and the cool kids are wearing it. So, yeah, of course, that's a bling. He'll claim for himself, too. That's how you get the inconsistencies. And what I have to do with these guys is point out you are just blowing smoke up your ass. You will say anything to pretend that you're heroic and that you win every interaction. And the nice thing about it is that when you do that, they keep on proving it over and over. So you say, see what you did? You did the same thing here. You will say anything to pretend that you are heroic. And my goal is to disappoint them, not to change their mind, but this does result in the backfire effect. I set it up so that when they leave, I can claim victory. I don't believe in that kind of stuff, but I'm playing their game at them.
Mhm.
And the idea is, yes, they will assail me on the way out the door, but I have found in my life that quite often I will reject criticism and be deeply affected by it nonetheless.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, so I keep that in mind and don't assume, well, don't ever confront people because that could backfire or that will backfire or that it's immoral. No, I think you've got to. I think it's our civic duty to disappoint absolutists
Mm.
or authoritarians. I think it's our civic duty. And it's
Mm.
got nothing to do with what they claim to believe because I don't think they believe or think. It's an escape from that into a kind of an animal braying. They're making animal braying sounds that are like territorial pissing. That's how I think about it. Boy, do I get on. I had coffee this morning. I apologize.
That's
I
fair
also
enough.
do it very ironically. You have to do a whole lot of self-effacing humor if you can pull off that degree of thuggish attack on people's beliefs. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to treat people where you find them, and in terms of, hey, I had a psychiatrist friend who many years ago, the wonderful Betty Tilden, brilliant woman, and she said to me, "I hope you don't tell people what those awful Americans do." She was from South Africa, by the way, in interventions, that they must never argue with the cult member. They must never lose their temper
Good.
with the cult member. And of course, the response is easy. It says, "Of course, I tell them that, but I know they're not going to do it." It's just a matter of getting
Yeah,
some restraint. And occasionally, it will be that somebody becoming angry and highly confrontational will mean that somebody goes away. And this is something I found as a teenager, that if I became markedly annoyed, I'm thinking about a particular friend of mine who was very clever, but if I became markedly annoyed with him about how stupid his view was, the next day he'd come back with my view. And that interested me. It didn't seem fair, didn't seem responsible on my part. And so I didn't do it deliberately. It's just something I observed on one occasion. But sometimes we'll put up all of our defenses. And as you say, when we go away, we'll find that our defenses have, in
that's
fact, been
right. That's right. Yeah.
penetrated.
Yeah, I think so. I see clients now who are mostly trying to figure out how to deal with an absolutist in their life that
Mm.
is in their face with someone, and they need to get their minds back from it. I never prescribe how, so I'm basically trying to train people in how to deal with people who they've lost ground to, who
Yeah.
are in their lives. So then it can be relatives or something like that. Okay.
Mm.
Um, I never prescribe a single approach. I say there
Mm.
are basically three moves you've got available in any, and they are assert, accommodate, leave. And there's lots of varieties of how you do those
Yeah.
things. And any one of them can work and any one of them can fail with a person like this.
Mm.
Leave it, accommodate would include humoring them. That is, or meeting them as if they're decent people. Give an inch and they'll give an inch back. So that can happen, or they
Mm.
can keep on taking from you.
Mm.
In general, what I'm arguing though, and I got somewhere with Joan Blades with this. She did concede at some point that there were right wingers, left wingers, and assholes. That's actually three parties at this point, and that the assholes are taking over.
Mm.
So I'm saying when you're dealing with an absolutist, um, you need to keep the power of assertion in mind because it is preemptive of violence.
Mm.
That is, I think verbal combat, which the left or us liberal types have eschewed for years as unnecessary and immoral in a world where there's very little evidence of that. I think we actually need verbal combat. The Brits were quite good at it. Last night I was reading a book of just about strategies used in in argumentation by British in the Parliament. Fabulous, strategies, but a lot of them are they savage character.
Mm.
And I think it's important to savage character sometimes. I think that
Though
if
it's within very careful guidelines in the British Parliament that
no,
you're
that's
not
right,
allowed
that's
to
right.
use an insulting term to a fellow
No,
parliamentarian.
but you can circle, you can get obvious. Here's one of we think that the ad hominem fallacy is attacking character.
Mm.
It's as though one never should. And the number of Trumpists, it's their opening line is if I attack their character, if I say there's something wrong with Trumpism, they say you're using an ad hominem argument, therefore I don't have to listen to you, which
Yeah.
is vastly amusing because actually all it means is if you know that someone's a total jerk and they say that it's raining outside, it doesn't mean it's necessarily not raining.
Mm.
That's all the ad hominem fallacy means.
Mm.
But
Of
it
course.
doesn't mean don't never attack character. You
Mm.
have to be able to attack character because people are systematically doing things that are dangerous. If you call someone a criminal, that's not an ad hominem. If you call a
Mm.
criminal, that's not an ad hominem fallacy
No, and if
mistake.
you point out that Freud, Jung, and various other people had massive character defects, given what they're trying to teach us, it
That's
becomes
right, which is
highly
not
relevant. Yeah.
yeah, which is independent of whether their stuff is right or wrong.
Mm.
That's all the ad
Yeah.
hominem thing is about. So anyway, I have to caution about this. I do attack character. I attack it in a way that I say this is a systematic move you're using to feel exceptionally heroic, and
Mm.
it's a generic move. It's got nothing to do with what you claim to believe.
Mm.
It's just the standard cult move where you just assign yourself all the positive terms and negative terms to anybody who
Mm.
challenges you. And it's unimpressive. It doesn't, I mean, it's a form of, I'll talk about it as you are masturbating in public.
Mm.
That is what you're doing.
Mm.
You're jerking off to your own authority. You're in a circle jerk. Do I shame them for masturbation? No, I masturbate. I'm an enthusiastic masturbator. I
Good
just
to
read
know.
I just read a wonderful history of cultural attitudes about masturbation. It's fascinating.
What's that called?
It's called Solitude, Sex and Solitude. I'll send you a link to it. It's by
Yeah,
a
please
Berkeley
do.
history professor. I had to read it because it's about off jerking. It's about
Mm.
masturbation is an exceptionally shameful form of sexual engagement in current culture because it's engaged in what I call libido, the ego stroking side of it. You're caught, if you're caught masturbating, you're caught fancying yourself, flattering yourself. Self-pleasuring is a touchy topic for us. And yet I'm saying, no, I basically say to the Trumpists, I say, self-love is important, but get a room.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
jerk off in public. Don't join some public circle jerk that treats government like your private vanity project. It's tacky.
Mm.
And so that's a different angle from the one where you're trying to point out inconsistencies in the leader's thinking.
Yeah. I mean,
They both have their place.
I go specifically to inconsistencies in the leader's statements. So that there'll be points that I don't have to make any argument about. It's clear. When Ron Hubbard says he was crippled and blinded in World War II in one place, and where he says that, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the end of World War II, he beat up 3 petty officers in another place, and where in another place he said, I wasn't injured in any way.
And yet
those things are useful to disengage the person and make an initial change. I'm not prescribing it for all circumstances. I'm saying it's very successful with cult members.
It could well be. I'll take your word for it that it is. Here's what so it's not with biblical people. That is pointing out the inconsistencies in the Bible don't have that effect.
If you point out inconsistencies in the leader of their particular biblical sect, you might find something different.
I doubt it, and here's why. What we want is a wild card trump card. That's what I'm claiming. That's what a human would want. That's what any organism would want if it knew what was doing. That you want perfect freedom and perfect safety. Okay, how do you get that? Well, take a look at a book like the Bible. It's touted as the one true way. It is touted as the singular formula for living right. But that's not how it reads at all. History proves over and over that it is a catalog of cherry-pickable rationalizations for doing whatever the fuck you want. That's what the Bible is. In practice, it's a catalog of inconsistent rationalizations that has history just proves there's nothing that can't be justified with the Bible. Okay.
Yeah.
And yet it's sold as the singular, indomitable, sacred formula. What I'm saying is that's what a cult leader would provide. It would be the trump card of we have the one true way, which you're getting from Trump these days, and the wild card of you getting to you get to interpret it any way you want. Make America Great sounds like a formula, but it's as inclusive as you could get, because who wouldn't want to bring back something from the past? It's a total Rorschach blot.
Yeah,
so
who knows which period in the past this refers to? And I've been wondering about that since I first heard the phrase.
That's right.
When was it great? You know,
well,
is it the Marshall Plan? Is it
right? No, but we on the outside can think ourselves clever for being able to point out that kind of inaccuracy. I'm saying something else. I'm saying step out to look at the generic formula and what a human would want. I'd want to be able to claim that what I'm doing is dictated by a recipe, by a formula, by an algorithm that is unassailable. And I would want to be able to claim that anything I want to do has that quality. And I think that if we start to expose that that's the formula, it's basically a wild card, I can do anything, and a trump card, whatever I do is above reproach. That would be the appetite, and that's all they're doing when they're jerking off in public to their own authority. I think that is a useful and underexploited technique. And it goes beyond saying, but did you see that there's an inconsistency in what he claims? I mean, I'm on a site called Religion is Poison, and nonstop it's pointing out the inconsistencies in the book, and yet it doesn't make this further point, which is, of course, it's inconsistent. You'd want it to be inconsistent. It's a catalog of rationalizations. That's what people want.
I mean, I'm an agnostic. I'm not interested in any set belief system, but I've spent my life studying religion one way or another. I was involved with Buddhism for a long time. I've translated the Tao Te Ching, and I'm fascinated. And one of the things that really interests me is the difference between the general Christian hermeneutics, the interpretation of the Bible, and the Jewish hermeneutics of Torah, the Old Testament, in that Jewish tradition in Talmud, in Mishnah, is Pesha, these are stories which we interpret to understand our lives, as opposed to this is the received word of God, which is the Christian view of this. So you can have a whole cultural difference in how a text is viewed, but generally, the Zend-Avesta, the Mahabharata, the Vedas, the Digha Nikaya, the great works are taken as, well, we use the word biblical, they're taken to be true. And I wouldn't seek to get somebody to look at their Christian belief by showing any of the thousands of contradictions and impossibilities, like Joshua making the sun stand still, or the violence, the first genocide in recorded history.
For what reason? Why wouldn't you do that?
Because I agree with you, it's not an approach that's viable. So if I'm talking with somebody who's a Christian, it's not so much the belief system that the person has, it's how they're applying it to the world and how it becomes dangerous. So if I look to, I briefly met, I think he's called Livingston Fagan, and I think he spent 17 years in prison after Waco. And I was sorry that our encounter was brief. We were both on a TV show in 2012, because he fascinated me. He was a really bright man who still, after 17 years in jail, believed that David Koresh was a messiah figure. And I would love to have explored that conversation further. But the conversation would have been about Koresh and Koresh's statements. And I don't know enough about him. The question I did ask is it true that he had sex with a 12-year-old girl? And there was no answer forthcoming to that. He wasn't going to answer that question. But it's not a kind of formula. I've found it useful with members of a variety of cults to actually say, well, the leader says you always do this, and here he says you never do this. What do you think? And getting them to explore those things. But there are many other ways to get somebody to think. And as you say, challenging their belief, pointing out their belief is public masturbation or is destructive to others. It's valuable.
Again, I want to say it's not a belief. I don't consider it a belief. They
idea or
no, it's a formula. It's a formula. I want to make clear, I would have lots to learn from you about the kinds of interventions you do. I also had 7 years of yeshiva, and I know that while they're on the fence about it too. That is, it's not like the entirety of Judaism sees these as just stories like any other stories.
Of course not. But there is a tendency in Christianity to just say
there's a tendency, and what I'm saying is there's a tendency in humans, in me, that is, there is a receptivity in us. And it is played circumstantially very different in different places. Yesterday, I had a long conversation with my friend who's embedded among the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. Those people are fascinating. I've hung out with them. That came out of ICSA. I met this person there. We've stayed friends since then. Anyway, but that appetite is there, and it's a freedom from thinking. It's a freedom from belief.
Of course.
It's basically a kind of animal braying where you assign the positive terms to yourself and the negative terms to your opponents, and you get to basically rationalize anything by saying, I can do this, no deed too dirty for a X like me. Basically, X means saint. No deed too dirty for a MAGA like me. That is, I am permanently pre-absolved by association with terms that I use without paying any attention to what they actually mean. It's a simple, logical association. Christian is good, I'm good, therefore I'm Christian. Therefore, if you attack me, you're attacking Christianity. Oh. It's as simple a deduction as that. And no wonder people fall for it. So it's not about, I don't debate this is just another quiver in the arsenal. It's another tool. It's another golf club. That is, I will not debate their content. I will not try to point out what's wrong with their content or their leader. I am instead pointing out how they are engaging in a standard human formulaic approach to pretending that they are pre-absolved. That is, they are trying to escape reality into being legends in their own minds. That's all. Yeah. And relentlessly, and the more they prove that everything they say in response only reinforces that message.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think it was Pope Clement in the 11th century who decided that it was not a violation of the commandment, thou shalt not kill, if you killed a Muslim.
Right,
because,
that's right.
And the conquistador had if you're not Christians, we're going to take you over. You don't rate as humans. So, and in terms of, looking at Peshar within Judaism, of course, this is a matter for the rabbis. It's not a matter for rank and file people like me.
That's right.
So, yeah, this is fascinating. In terms of the British Parliament, I would profoundly recommend reading something by Rory Stewart, who was a member of Parliament. And he's a Harvard professor, again, I think now, who actually shows what happens. He was a minister, and he shows what happened behind the scenes and why he had to get the hell out. It's a very good book called Politics on the Edge. He's written a few others. And in terms of parliamentary comment, the Dennis Healey, when he was a minister. I think the comment was made about John Major, the Tory Prime Minister, that it was like being worried by a dead sheep. So one can, if one is elegant enough, make insults.
That's right. No, I study the art of invective. It's yeah, and once again, I think that it is preventative of physical violence. Obviously, it can provoke physical violence, but so can docility and the gentleness and the increasingly what I've seen is that when you liberalize a society, you get a faction that is held together by the sense that liberty is exclusively for them. So they're entitled to do whatever they want. Fighting against, so there's a common front, a juggernaut, fighting against inclusive liberty, which cannot get itself organized into a common front. Because it's even confused about whether they should tolerate the intolerant behavior of the exclusive liberty people. So I'm busy thinking what we're doing isn't keeping up. And I'm trying to find other approaches, and that's why I'm, in with practical local cases, that is, I'm helping people try out different strategies, sometimes humoring, sometimes reaching out, sometimes leaving, sometimes pushing back, and how to push back is a particular interest to me. How to push back in a way that's actually more confrontational than many in the interventionist world seem to think is tolerable or acceptable or morally justified.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at, say, John Gottman's work, the famous couples lab, where he in the 70s came along and said, I'm going to prove all of the touchy-feely ideas about being completely honest and lovely all the time, and found that the successful couples are actually ones that argued. And they argued for the safety of the partner. And they were willing to be perfectly forceful and put the thing there. So this whole kind of, Esalen approach to humanity, it's interesting, but it's become a religious system. It's not practical.
Yeah, and it has self-selected for more gentle temperaments. That is, I lived on a commune for 7 years, and we were pacifists, and I know the temperaments that were drawn to it, and it was called those temperaments were reinforced there. That it's a kind of be like me syndrome. Now, Gottman also points out the problems with contempt, and here's where I would go with it
exactly.
Which is that I think the closest you can get to intimacy at any level is a capacity to laugh at and with each other. That is, it's not just looking out for each other's safety or arguing over that kind of thing. It's actually being able to admit that we're laughing at the human predicament.
We embrace the other's failings.
It's simply recognizing that sometimes being honest is a mistake, and sometimes being kind, humoring them is a mistake. And both of you admitting that you're in the treacherous zone where you can either show your respect by humoring someone, by respecting their sensitivities, or you could show your respect by being blunt with them because you respect their capacity to take it, and you recognize that this is iffy guesswork, that you could be wrong about when to do these things, and therefore you're not pretending you're living by some formula. You're dealing with the trade-offs. You're keeping up appearances with a wink. I think that a wink is really what's involved here. So when I'm giving someone a hard time about their Trumpist belief, I am putting my hand on their shoulder. I realized the other day it's carrot sticks. That is, I'm giving them carrots of, dude, come join us humans. Get off your high horse, dude. And at the same time, I'm giving them a major ration of shit about their overall MO. So it's very much of, I'm right here. We can talk. And yeah, you can make lots of fun of me. It's one of the main techniques I use. If someone says, you're uncaring, I say, perhaps you mistake me for someone who's trying to be caring. I'm not trying to be caring. I'm trying to care about the right things, not the wrong things, whereas you pretend that you're caring about everything, which no one can do.
Mm.
So it's a
Yeah.
matter of, it's a kind of Aikido where they come at you, savaging you for some violation.
Mm.
And you point out, no, being caring is a bad thing in lots of situations.
Mm.
You don't care about the wrong
Well,
thing.
I mean, the Jacobins cared for liberty so much that they executed people to make
That's right.
sure
That's
they'd
right.
have
That's
freedom.
right. That's right. In the name of freedom. Right. And so the
And
paradoxical. Anyway, all of that.
I think, I mean, I'm pick up the idea that you can take the doctrine of the leader if you look at somebody like Pelly or Branham, the Pentecostalist sects, that you can have a reasonable discussion with somebody who's enamored with these absolute vicious lunatics by showing how deeply they contradicted themselves over the years. So I think sometimes it can be useful.
I,
Yeah.
I hope you've never heard. This happens to me all the time. Someone
Mm.
says A, and I say A and B,
Mm.
and they say, "What? You don't like A? You think B's the answer to everything?" No, I have to be clear. I've opened Pandora's box. It's and ors.
Mm.
Sometimes I can be both honest and kind. Sometimes I have to choose between
Mm.
I'd say honesty and kindness. We're talking about different strategies that can work in different
Yeah.
situations and can fail in different situations.
I just took it that you'd said that the idea of showing contradictions about Christian leaders would not be effective, and I may simply have misheard you.
No,
Uh,
I would say that it hasn't so far. So what I do with my clients is we try out a technique for dealing with whoever they're dealing with, and we keep in mind that with someone that nothing works with, you'll end up trying everything but consistency because nothing's working. So
mm,
okay, but in the meantime, we will try other things. So I am
mm.
saying, uh, and so I'm saying that historically, the exposing of the inconsistencies by themselves does not bring the theologically committed around in large numbers.
Well, I'm not
It
looking
does bring them
to
around, but let me just finish the thought.
surely.
That does not mean that what I'm suggesting as the next thing to try would work. And also, what do I mean? Actually, lots of people are dropping out of religion because of the inconsistency. So I could be completely wrong about that. They're not dropping out as fast as I'd like. That doesn't mean they're not dropping out. It could be effective, right? So,
Hmm.
so I don't know, but I would say that there's a way in which, yeah, I think of the hypocrisy as a symptom of something more fundamental, which is they're just collecting the positive names for themselves and the negative names for anyone who disagrees with them. And as a result, they end up with inconsistencies.
The fundamental attribution error in
Yeah,
one of its
that's
forms.
right. It's right. And I would say it's more than that in that it's motivated. It's a willful version of it.
Mm. Yeah,
So
and I think that I think we've talked for a long time, which has been great
we
fun.
have.
But
I'm
so
exhausting.
I will come back to just one thing that you said,
Please, yes.
which is the assholes are taking over. And I'd just like to point out that the assholes have been in control throughout human history, and that what we are trying to do is to change that. One of my studies is honorable politicians who have been effective, and my list is very short. That most of the people who have governed us, and I'm sad that I would actually, it definitely include Joe Biden among these people, have been tyrants. They've been people who have not followed. We don't have democracy. It doesn't mean that there haven't been societies like the Indus Valley for 700 years, in Pakistan now, 700 years without war. There was a similar society in Ukraine. I think you're familiar with David Wengrow's and David Graeber's work. So there have been societies that have managed pretty well, but the Western society is not one of them. It's a tyrannical society, an authoritarian society.
Yeah.
And at the moment, with populism, it's getting worse. And Trump is the American, poster child for authoritarian behavior. We've got Erdogan and Xi and Putin and Orban and all of these people who are pushing against the idea of liberal
Yeah,
democracy.
good. I could make that case with you. I also want to pose an alternative perspective on it.
Mm.
There's a wonderful book called The Paradox of Democracy about democracies often end up electing tyrants.
Yeah,
And I also have to come back to my question, what is a butthead, since it can't just be whoever I happen to butt heads with. So
yeah.
I'm very particular about who I call an absolutist and who I
Mm.
don't. That is, I'm trying to be very careful not to just decide that someone is an asshole. They could be a terrible leader, they could be incompetent, they could have caused huge damage and still not be an asshole. I mean,
Mm.
the third chapter of my book is on the variety of ways in which we think we can diagnose assholes that don't work. And you know, being a forceful leader, I think that there's kind of asshole behavior that I see among some of my friends who do a kind of an armchair virtue voting. That
Mm.
is, if good people like them were in charge of the world, they would run it with an open receptivity that no, it's not a problem with. I think that to get into those positions, those circumstances, it would be very hard to be a good leader, especially these
Mm.
days. So those are some I mean to provoke some questions about that assumption. For example, you associated not having wars with not having asshole leaders. I'm not sure that's the case. I mean, if we end up with
Well,
a
they don't
world.
appear to have had any leaders at all. They appear to have had something
No,
close
that,
to
that
an actual
that's all fine. And
democracy.
I lived on a
Yeah,
commune that had no leaders. So I,
yeah.
I lived for 7 years on a commune that had no leaders, and it wasn't exactly a cult. It doesn't quite qualify. I was cultish about it. But anyway, I have to just I think that yes, you're right, and it gets to something that that's coming full circle.
Mm.
The appetite in humans to feel absolved, absolutely safe,
Mm.
and absolutely free is enormous. And it would be that way in any symbol using organism, that is, any
Mm.
organism that can conceptualize, imagine the ideal, see where they fall short, self-idealize.
Mm.
Anywhere in the universe, that's what we're fundamentally up against,
Yeah.
which is that language enables us to become idealists in the most dangerous way, that is
Mm.
detached from reality. And that's where the concern has always been. Um, and and that is the number one crisis in the world, not climate crisis, not nukes, not pandemics, because as long as we keep on falling for fake ways to feel perfectly safe and free, we can never address those other
Mm.
problems.
Mm. I agree with you.
Okay, good. That's a
Yeah,
good place
I
to start.
absolutely agree. And I think, I mean, I moved from in my in the field of cultic studies, whatever that is,
Yeah.
the word totalitarian or totalist has ruled for many years. And about 6, 7, 8 years ago, I decided to shift from this idea of totalitarian to authoritarian because it doesn't matter if the authority is total. I think the word was first used of Mussolini. It doesn't matter if the authority is total. It matters that there's an authoritarian attitude to whatever degree. And I think, unfortunately, our educational systems and our political systems are fundamentally authoritarian. Um, I don't think we're in any way
Yeah.
ready for pure democracy. I don't think that, though
Uh,
Switzerland seems to manage with plebiscite democracy, but nowhere else. But I think we can move towards it. And I think what you're saying, that it's not nukes, it's not climate change, it is human attitudes and human behavior, which are very malleable. And we are perfectly capable of sudden and distinct change so that we stop screwing everything up and screwing one another up. For
yeah.
me, war does represent the worst example of human behavior.
War is bad, and there should be less of it. We both agree on that.
Yeah.
I I I I will. I love that we keep on engaging like this. I hope it's working okay for you.
Yeah,
Um,
fine. Yeah.
okay, so that didn't what you just said. I've it's familiar. I know that argument. I think that's the positive optimist stuff that I'm critiquing. And here's why I come back to total. I'm actually using no. with clients, I am now talking about how they live. Some of them sound like they're living in a domestic totalitarianism, by which I mean the original definition, as I heard it, was total control, including of what you can think.
Well, the
So
original
there are,
definition is simply the combining of the word total and the word authority.
but
So I
listen to
understand.
this definition, because I got it from Arendt, and she says a variety of things. It's
Yeah,
not
well,
just that
Arendt is post-Second War. Mussolini,
I
you
don't
know,
care. I'm
you use the
proposing
term.
something.
I'm sorry, Jeremy.
Propose
You use the expression "the original meaning." I'm
Fair
questioning
enough.
that.
I am
I'm not saying.
completely wrong. I'm completely wrong about that.
Yeah.
I take that account. What I'm saying is that one definition that I've heard is that Calvin was the first totalitarian because what it was control of what you thought. And this is just a stepping stone to where I want to go with it, which is there's a part of me that would like to surrender control of what I think to someone else.
Mm,
That is, when I joined the commune, I uh, loved my freedom from doubt. That was mostly why I was there.
yeah,
Yes, I bought
absolutely. Yeah.
everything else, but I now felt like I was on an express train that was assured to be destined towards a virtuous, glorious life.
Mm,
That's what I wanted. I wanted to
mm,
surrender my brain over to something else. Okay, so when you say we can transcend and get to a place, that's the hope talking. And I think that's the optimism talking. And I want to point out, you're as hopeful as the next guy. We're all hopeful. In fact, MAGA is deeply hopeful. They're just
mm,
hopeful for very different things than I am.
mm.
Most hope or most romanticism is a kind of
But they don't
self-condemnation.
have any kind of toolbox, and I do. And they haven't proved that they can help people to change, and I have. So there is a significant difference. They are pie in the sky optimists. My optimism is grounded in 40 years of experience with people and seeing transformation and change. So I know that people can change. I don't know if we can cause those changes rapidly enough. We need to get into the educational system if we're to do that. And the problem is the educational system is authoritarian. That's its nature. So,
All right.
but
All right.
perhaps you better.
I think you get the last word on that one, sweetheart. You get to claim that as your last word, and I'll leave it
Yes,
at that.
absolutely. And I would say, going back to the overlords of Babylon, we have totalitarians. If your wife should say something unpleasant, you smash her teeth out with a brick, as the original Hammurabi's law
Wait, no,
code.
you already got the last word. I
Oh,
think.
sorry. Great. Well, let's do this again. A couple of months'
I'd
time.
I'd love to if you're
Yeah.
up for it. Yes.
No,
Some people find me insufferably abrasive. I hope you don't.
I don't find you in the least bit abrasive. You are totally insufferable, of course, but
Good. Thank you. Thank you. I, I wouldn't have felt like my job was done if I hadn't proved that everybody says I'm such a disagreeable man, and I can't think why.
no, I haven't felt that at all. As I say, I believe that cognitive dissonance can be a pleasure, and
Good.
so
It is for
I
me.
yeah, I like to be challenged, and I can either justify my brilliant thinking or change my mind, as the case
That's
may
right. That's
be.
second guessing versus second guessing. That's
Yeah,
the issue. All right. I hope we
fantastic.
do this soon again soon. You take
Yeah,
care.
thank you
All
so
right.
much, Jeremy. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.